Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Happy Recap Podcast. I'm JB, along with EJ. Glad to have you along this week as we head hurtling towards the end of spring training, and certainly with a mere week till opening day from our record date of March 25th. We are certainly getting more and more excited as this team comes together more and more. And later on in the program, we've got our old friend Jared Diamond from the Wall Street Journal. He's going to be joining us talking about the book Swing Kings, which is now available in paperback. A definite pandemic read for me, EJ. And I tell you that the thing for me with that book is it came along at a time where there was no sports, there was nothing. It was a desert, and that book really helped me get through part of April there when we were waiting desperately for anything vaguely sports related.
Yeah, I think I actually posted the memory on my Facebook page the other day that ESPN had been running a stone skipping contest on the airwaves. That's how desperate we were for any type of sports related content. So Jared's book really couldn't have hit at a more perfect time for us. And it was a great read and it was really eye opening.
Yeah, absolutely. So I look forward to talking to him about that. That's coming up in a few minutes. Certainly a bit of news, I guess, out of the Mets camp since we'd last done a show. Most notably, the biggest injury to beset the team since the beginning of spring, with Cookie Carrasco being out potentially as late as into mid to late May. Um, the beautiful thing about it, EJ, is this is why we have depth.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it at length as why I think this team is going to go deep this year. And that's because this team is so deep. It stinks to lose Cookie. I thought he was going to be a pretty integral part of the rotation to start the year. But I mean, losing him now is certainly better than losing him late in the season when the team could be in contention to really make some serious playoff implications. But the fact is that I feel very comfortable that this team will hold its head above water, losing a key part of that rotation right now.
Yeah, as it stands, it looks like David Peterson and Joey uh, Joey Fuego, as I like to call him, is looking like he's in the last spot, as Jordan Yamamoto was sent back to minor league camp yesterday, and he was considered really the other candidate. And what that really turns it into is between Yamamoto at AAA and the other two at the major league level. Long term, it's a play for Cookie spot, and it's also there's also the issue of one Noah Syndergaard, and when will he return? And certainly, if you ask Noah, that's tomorrow. If you ask everybody else, it's still June. Appreciate Noah's excitement and anxiousness to get back out there, but those don't want any injuries recurring. But that's the beautiful thing. You look at this team, and you go, "This is a lineup I don't mind going to battle with at all." And you're telling me we're getting two solid pitchers, if not spectacular pitchers, coming back in May and June. I'll sign me up.
I used to always kind of mock the Wilpons that whenever we had someone on the DL that was scheduled to come back midsummer, they would always use the excuse, "Well, we're getting this guy back," which is just like adding a pitcher in the trade market. But in this case, it actually is the reality that given the Mets' propensity for injuries not really healing themselves in a timely manner, it certainly seems like Noah is on pace to be back on schedule, if not ahead of schedule, which is not something we're familiar with this team. And certainly we could be talking about a team that come mid-July that neither Joey Lucchese or David Peterson are even part of the rotation any longer.
Yeah, and that's not a criticism of them. That's a
Nope.
statement of the depth of this team, and that the depth that they are willing to carry throughout the season. I think if you come for July 1st and uh, Peterson, Joey, and Jordan are your number 1, 2, and 3 starters at Syracuse, I think you're in pretty good shape. I think that says good things about the New York Mets.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the event that anybody else goes down, it's nice to have that many bullets left in the chamber that you can call up at a given notice.
And so, I mean, we look at that. Certainly, the last start from DeGrom continues to prove that yes, indeed, he's superhuman, even in the spring. And certainly, we've seen impressive starts and impressive stuff from both Marcus Stroman and Taiwan Walker, who I think, especially in the case of Taiwan Walker, because he comes in a lesser known quantity to some extent than Marcus Stroman. I think Taiwan's going to really turn some heads this season.
Yeah, I agree. I have him as one of the guys who's going to really open some eyes this year. And I think with the injury to Carrasco, his role in that rotation becomes so much more important. And I think he is definitely poised to rise to that challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're looking forward to spring training continuing on. A bit of a detour today as we're going to be talking about a book that's about hitting, which is a fantastic book. Again, Swing Kings available at Amazon and all local bookstores. If you got a local bookstore, especially in the tri-state, please visit it. Please buy the book there. Nothing. Get the book. That's number one. But if you can help keep some of those small bookshops in business, that's a great thing to
Yeah.
be doing right about now. EJ, one of the things that is, been a fun thing about the Happy Recap over the years, going back to the original version of the show years ago, is that we've gotten to know some great writers over the years. And certainly one of my all-time favorites from the beat was our good friend Jared Diamond. And last year, he wrote a book. It's called Kings. Swing Kings. I will get that right. I've read it twice, and I still say things. We use things so much in the world today. But Swing Kings is the book, and we're excited to have Jared join us. He probably hates me now for screwing up the title of his book, but we'll make it up to you, Jared. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. You're forgiven. It's okay. You get one mistake. You just used it in the first 2 minutes of the podcast. So now you got to get it together.
Oh, that could be a problem. I've been doing this for years, and I still haven't gotten it together. So look, before we start about talking about the book itself, the book has just now come out in paperback. It came out last year in hardcover. Talk a little bit about launching a book heading into a pandemic.
Yeah, it was not the launch that we anticipated when we sold the project a couple of years ago. So the book came out right at the end of March. We had all gone into pandemic life about 2 weeks before the book came out. And in the weeks leading up to that, you saw, I think, the writing on the wall a little bit that, hey, this could get a little weird and what's going to happen. And suddenly events that I had planned started one by one getting postponed. So there was a slow trickle of, okay, maybe we should postpone this, or maybe we can't do this. I don't know. Let's wait and see. And then, of course, the middle of March came, and that was that. So when the book came out, it was not on anyone's mind, even including my own, honestly, because we were all just getting acclimated to our new way of living. But it was okay. It's a shame from an ego standpoint because all of the fun parts I didn't get to do, all the signings and all of the events and a lot of the big media appearances, all wiped away. I never really got to go to a store to see it on the shelf in those first few weeks. But in spite of all of that, it's still, the book sold well. It's found an audience. That was obviously my biggest fear, was would it just get buried in the avalanche of news that we are now living with. But fortunately, people have rallied behind it anyway. So I'm very appreciative that in spite of everything, people had some time for my silly little book.
Well, from a personal standpoint, I know I was kind of bummed out because I had hoped to attend one of your signings, and after knowing you for the better part of a decade, to press the flesh and shake the hand, and wasn't able to do that. But that being said, it seems like everybody's new spouse during all of this has been Amazon. So that certainly had to have been a bit of a benefit for you, that we all suddenly found ourselves with a little bit more free time to do some leisure reading, and Amazon seemed to be the perfect partner to go to.
Yeah, obviously the online sales represented the overwhelming majority of them, especially in the first few months because bookstores were all closed. It's actually funny because maybe in September or so, it was getting into the fall. I was walking with my wife in Hoboken. We live in Jersey City. We were in Hoboken. It was a nice summer day. And we walked by Little City Books, which is a well-known bookstore in Hoboken that we had a scheduled event at. It was going to be me and Mark Carrig, actually, another former Mets beat writer. We're going to do an event together there. This was now many months after the event was supposed to happen, and the poster advertising it was still in the window. So it was a little bittersweet to walk by and see a giant poster with the cover of my book in the window of this store, knowing that not only did that event not happen, it was not ever going to.
It's not been an uncommon thing over the years for folks from the Mets beat to be involved in a book. Certainly, we've seen them over the years, including Tony DeComo this year with David Wright. But how, for you, since this is a very different book than like a player biography or et cetera like that, how did you go from Mets beat writer, and I still maintain one of the best of all time, because you wrote the stories that were worth reading, that had depth. So this seemed like a natural progression to me, but what was your progression to go from beat reporter to author?
So I left the Mets beat after the 2015 season. I did 1 year sort of on the Yankees beat. I was sort of supposed to cover the Yankees in 16, but didn't quite happen the way we anticipated. And then by sort of the end of 2016, heading into 17, I was made the national baseball writer. So now I was no longer on the beat. I was covering everybody. I was covering all 30 teams and covering the whole industry. And my first spring training in that role, which was spring of 2017, I knew I wanted to do a story about some of these hitters who had remade their swings with sort of these weirdo outside hitting coaches. Marlon Byrd with the Mets was the first example of this that I knew about. I covered him in 2013, my first year on the beat. Marlon Byrd, any Mets fan remembers, had a sort of a stunningly great season for the Mets in 13, ultimately got traded to Pittsburgh in a deal that ended up not netting the Mets much of anything because Dilson Herrera didn't actually pan out, nor did Vic Black really either. So that trade didn't quite help the Mets much, but at the time we thought it was a pretty good trade for the Mets. And Marlon Byrd remade his swing with his outside swing coach. And I thought that was just the craziest thing ever. I just couldn't quite fathom how a major league player, a major league veteran who had a decade's worth of service time under his belt, was learning a new swing by some dude that never played above basically junior college baseball. That blew my mind. And it sort of even intensified in 2014 and 15 as we started hearing about guys like Justin Turner and JD Martinez and Josh Donaldson. This story kept coming up and I was so sort of captivated by it. So I knew I wanted to write about it the second I had the freedom and flexibility to do so as the national baseball writer. So that's what I did. The story ran in March, maybe late February, early March of 2017, a story about these outside hitting gurus that were working with major league stars and making them better. And then the book literally came from that. The day the story ran, literally that day, I got an email from Lauren Sharp, who is now my agent, who at the time was a stranger, and said, I think this story is amazing. And I think there's a whole book here. And can we meet? We ended up meeting for a drink a week later. And I was immediately sold by the idea. And the rest was history. It's funny. It was not something on my mind to turn that story into a book. It came from a very great agent who was enterprising and had a really keen eye for what made a good story. And I was very fortunate that I took that meeting and decided to proceed.
Well, from the time that you decided to proceed, I'm sure there were times that you had to have questioned, is there enough material here for a full book as opposed to a long form article, which is what you had excelled in so well in the past? Was there a point where you're like, oh, not only do I have enough material, but I don't know what I have to exclude here because it's going to run too long.
That's exactly what happened. 100%. That's exactly what happened. At the beginning, I was terrified. How am I going to write 90,000 words? I mean, my articles for the journal are like 1,200, 1,000. And now I'm being asked to write 90,000 on a topic that I knew a lot about, but I didn't have that much reporting in my notebook. It would require, I couldn't even fathom the amount of reporting that writing 90,000 words would take. And it's funny, in spring training now of 2018, I had now sold the book. And I'm talking to Justin Turner in the Dodgers clubhouse early in spring training out in Arizona. And I've known him for quite a while. I actually knew him when he was a minor leaguer in the Baltimore organization. So I've known Justin for quite a few years. And yeah, we're chatting. I talked to him for the book, and then afterward we were just chatting, and he was asking me, okay, so how long is the book? And I said, well, I don't know how many pages it's going to be sort of in the book, but it's about 90,000 words. And Justin said to me, well, how long? I said, I'm very nervous because my articles are like 1,000. I've never written anything more than maybe 1,500 in my life, 2,000 in my life. And he said, so the book's 90,000 and your article's 1,000. I said, yeah. He said, all right, you just have to write 90 articles. It doesn't sound that bad. And I said to him, I said, that's like me saying you have to get 185 hits this year, but you have to do it in one game. But the funny part was he was kind of right. That was exactly what sort of happened. It was like, okay, I just have to sort of take this one chunk at a time, one chunk at a time, one chunk at a time. And then about, a year or 6 months, 8 months into the process, I was like, wow, I'm going to have way more than I could use. I have to actually start cutting it down. I ended up having to cut out 20,000 words from the final product. So it all sort of worked out, but there was a nerve-wracking moment at the beginning.
So early on with your fascination in the topic, I mean, obviously a lot of things have changed with hitting in the past decade. What were some of the things that surprised you that even though you'd had interest in the topic, you were not expecting to find?
I thought that what was happening with guys like Turner and Martinez and all these guys, that it was something new, that this was this sudden revolution that sort of sprouted up in 2013, 14, 15. And what shocked me, what I learned is that for some of these coaches, guys like Craig Wallenbrock, who was JD Martinez's sort of guru, have been struggling and fighting to make their sort of ideas known for decades, going back to the 70s, to the 80s. There were people out there that were sort of arguing that, hey, the way we're teaching the swing is wrong and there is a better way. And just nobody listened. And nobody listened for so long because the baseball industry was so insular and it was so hidebound and it was so caught up in sort of, well, what did you do as a player yourself? And it was so shocking to me that it took so long for these people to be heard. And then suddenly they were, and it was like a total 180. Suddenly these people are heard and everyone goes, oh my God, we were totally wrong. We have to start listening to these people. And I just couldn't imagine what that was like, to fight for so long to have your idea heard. And then finally people going, wow, this is so amazing. This is this brilliant new thing. And go, what do you mean new? Like, I've been arguing this for 30 years. Where were you? I'm glad you're finally listening, but like, where's the credit that I've been fighting for so long? That was something that just really shocked me. I just had no idea what sort of the history and background of all of this was.
It's interesting because I'm guilty of it myself on the podcast many times. I've praised and preached the importance of the pitching coach at the major league level, but I've often dismissed the role of the hitting coach at the major league level, saying that once a guy reaches the majors, he's got his swing down. And your book completely disproves that how important the hitting coach's role is. And really, it's made me pay more attention and seeing from a Met-centric point of view, seeing the celebration of the players, having Chili Davis back from COVID relief where he was not around the team last year, and now all of a sudden how much they're embracing him back. It seems like the role of the hitting coach is really being magnified in the eyes of the casual fan.
It is. And look, you're not wrong for feeling the way you felt about hitting coaches historically, because I think what's important to remember is that what a major league hitting coach does and what someone like Craig Wallenbrock does are actually different jobs. It's true that during a major league season, you're playing 162 games, you have very few days off. You're not making big changes to your swing. It's not possible. You don't have time. You're in the middle of the season. You're just trying to grind it out and get through. You're not going to spend time during the season trying to really make big changes to your mechanics. Yeah, you'll make little tweaks as things sprout up, but you're not going to make big changes. The major league hitting coach's job is much more about the mental side of the game than is anything physical. It's about making sure that the hitters sort of prepared to play that night and then play again the next night and know the pitchers they're going to face. And yeah, you'll make little mechanical tweaks as needed, but that's not the primary job. All of these big swing changes that guys made were A, made in the off season, and B, made with people that, I wouldn't even say would be necessarily all of them good major league hitting coaches. They're more like swing doctors. And it is a different job, because just because you're able to sort of teach mechanics doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to, you have 13 hitters you have to deal with every day and you have to sort of keep them on the right path mentally. Like there's overlap in the jobs, but they're not exactly the same, which is why I think it's so great now that teams are much more open to the idea that, hey, in the offseason, maybe we'll send a player that we think could benefit to one of these outside guys. And we're not going to worry so much about anything else, but you're going to be in the science lab and you're going to work on your swing every day for a month. Something you can never even think about doing in the regular season. And that's not what Chili Davis's job is with the Mets. That doesn't mean he's not a great hitting coach. By all accounts, he is. But that also doesn't mean Chili Davis would have been equipped to do what Doug Latta did with Justin Turner, for example.
We look at, Justin Turner, of course, is one of the best examples that you use, and it's probably one of the most painful for Mets fans, obviously, with him finding all of his success after leaving a Mets uniform, after being non-tendered. Talk a bit about, though, with baseball and how Turner was, basically bypassed by every team, including the Dodgers, in his free agency. What point for somebody like him do you think that becomes an option to go, I need to change something here?
Desperation plays a big role. Justin Turner, I think by the end of the 13 season, Justin Turner, I think, knew what he was and realized that the ceiling was not going to climb unless he made real changes. He had a chance to be a decent sort of backup infielder. That was what Justin Turner was going to be, the way he was before. There was no real way to change that unless he made major change to how he went about it. And Marlon Byrd played a big role, of course. Marlon Byrd introduced him to this different way of swinging, introduced him to Doug Latta, who ended up helping Justin remake the swing. And I know that still all these years later, there's so much frustration among Mets fans at how that all played out and why did they cut him and why did that happen? And look, we've never really gotten a good answer, and I don't think there ever will necessarily be a good answer for why the Mets cut him. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, it was a mistake. And I think what's so interesting about Turner being cut is that if it were instead of 2013 when this happened, but it was 2016, 15, I don't think it would have happened. He wouldn't have been cut, because what happened in 2015 was StatCast. StatCast came about, and suddenly there was all this data that the Mets would have had access to, where they would have said, hey, that great September that Justin Turner had in 13, where suddenly he was mashing and hitting home runs and hitting doubles. They would have seen that it wasn't a fluke, because they would have had this raw data about, hey, your exit velocity genuinely improved. Your launch angle genuinely improved. You actually were changing the way you were swinging the bat, which is something that they didn't have the ability to really track back in 2013. That's something that this is a name that I guess sort of now lives in infamy, but Jeff Luhnow, the former Astros, sort of disgraced former Astros GM, told me about JD Martinez, where he said the same thing, where he said, if we had the data that we had now when we cut JD Martinez, we never would have, because we would have known that the changes he made was real, that he was a fundamentally different hitter. In between 13 and 14, the Mets didn't. They didn't really know what they had, and neither did the Dodgers. Like you said, they signed him to a minor league contract, never believing that he was going to turn into a star. In many ways, the Dodgers has kind of lucked into it, and it was to the Mets' sort of disappointment.
I mean, I personally, I've never really faulted the Mets, because when they let Turner go, I believe he was what he was. But in the course of researching the book, you obviously had to study basically so many different players and the changes of their swing. And I'm sure you reviewed tons of film. How many guys did you actually analyze in the course of writing the book?
Well, there were tons of people that, I could have written about in the book, or considered writing about in the book. It sort of got narrowed down to 4 or 5 main people. Anyone who read the book knows JD Martinez, Justin Turner, and Marlon Byrd are sort of a duo.
Yep.
Josh Donaldson and Chris Colabello, another sort of name from the past, sort of linked together. And then Aaron Judge is also in the book prominently, as sort of, we could talk about Aaron Judge if we want, sort of an unusual outlier sort of case. I sort of narrowed it down because you couldn't really write about everybody, and you had to sort of pick the most interesting stories, and those were the people that I ultimately settled on being the most interesting. But certainly there are many others that could have been in the book, for sure. Guys that made changes to their swing and got much better. I just stuck with, but as the reporting went on, I said, okay, these are the most interesting, and these are the stories I'm going to tell to sort of stand in for the bigger story at large.
So as these new hitting gurus and whatnot are kind of coming to acceptance around the league, and with your book, I mean, to me, one of the things that kind of stood apart for me is it sounded like, basically the hitters version a couple of years later of, the fight to get Bill James taken seriously. With now we know to be analytics departments in every team in baseball, even the Mets. And I guess the question is, where do you see this going? Because I mean, certainly, we saw quite the evolution with analytics from even beyond where Bill James started, but it's certainly become an intrinsic, if not irremovable, part of this ball game.
Yeah, it's sort of a natural progression, right? If Moneyball was about a lot of things, but one thing Moneyball was clearly about was, hey, like the people that we've had making decisions about how to put together a baseball team have not been necessarily the most qualified people. And maybe just because you didn't play Major League Baseball yourself doesn't mean you can't be a great executive in Major League Baseball. And now, of course, the idea of having a former player as your GM is like, doesn't even exist. It's like an insane even thought, and it's all analyst types and MBAs and Wall Street people and Ivy Leaguers and whatnot. And it's not surprising that those people who at one time were outsiders are now insiders, and they are now open to the idea of other outsiders coming into the industry, outsiders on the coaching front, saying like, hey, well, we were not qualified to be GMs, but we've ended up being very good. So who's to say that this guy who didn't play baseball above high school isn't qualified to coach a major leaguer? And suddenly you see this revolution, this influx of guys with unusual backgrounds coming into these coaching jobs, guys that 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, never would have even been considered for a job like that, because the qualifications for being a major league coach for most of major league history was you played professional baseball and you were friends with the manager. That was basically the criteria. It's not really that much more complicated than that. Obviously, that has now changed. So you wonder, who are the next outsiders? Who is the next, what is the next sort of position, the next group where we have not, since we've sort of ruled out this kind of person as being a qualified candidate? And I don't know, is it something on the field? Is it like a left-handed catcher or a left-handed infielder? Is it, guys with different body types? Is it pitchers that don't throw 95 miles an hour? I don't know what it's going to be. But it strikes me that there's probably another group of outsiders somewhere that deserve more of a look than the industry has given them to this point, and we'll see what that group ends up being.
It's kind of amazing to see where we've progressed over the past 10 to 15 years, where there were guys who, even in their playing days, you look at an Alex Cora, you look at a Joe McEwing, and you said, oh, that guy someday is going to be a great major league manager based on their knowledge of the game and the fact they would always be seen picking their own manager's brain. And it was just all based on their on the field and in the dugout kind of knowledge. To then we had Moneyball, which not every team was fast to embrace initially. As you previously referenced, StatCast came up, and that kind of changed the game a lot. To now we sit here and we look at our team, the Mets, and they're under new ownership, and they are just fully embracing the entire metrics of the game. And it's amazing to see where we've really come in 10 to 15 years in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously the Mets were behind. I don't think that's a secret. Anybody who follows baseball knows that from a infrastructure standpoint, the Mets were behind under the Wilpons. Their front office was small compared to most in Major League Baseball, even compared to smaller market teams. It was not sophisticated. They didn't have a large analytics department. They were slow to invest in technology. Sort of the technologies that, say, a team like Houston and New York Yankees and Los Angeles were very quick to embrace. The Mets were very behind in that department. And look, that is just a direct link back to the Wilpons. They were just not something they valued. They did not keep up with the times in that way. So when Steve Cohen came in, I think he smartly said that that was going to be sort of his first priority. And the fact that they did not hire sort of that president of baseball operations, to me, I know that was disappointing to some Mets fans, but to me, that's actually was proof that he means what he says. He was not going to just hire someone to fill the role. He wanted that big fish. He wanted David Stearns. He wanted Eric Neander. He wanted one of these sort of really accomplished presidents of baseball operations that could really create a department. And I believe the Mets will still hire somebody like that ultimately, as contracts start to expire and they have more opportunity to talk to people when they're not trying to do this all in, a very short time frame. To me, that is the bigger job for Steve Cohen than even the roster in the immediate future, where the benefit of his resources to me and his enormous wealth is first improve the infrastructure that the Mets did not have, build a real front office, a 21st century 2021 front office. And once you have that in place, then you unleash those people onto building sort of a sustainable roster. And I think you could do that, especially because the Mets have a good roster now. Like the Mets have a team, to me, as we sit here today, that is one of the best two teams in the NL East, if not the best. A team that should absolutely 100% compete for the NL East championship, to me, with Atlanta. Like there's, I'm not saying I think they're a lock to win the NL East, but if you told me right now they're going to win the NL East, I'd say, yeah, that tracks. They're a very good team. So I think you could afford to say, okay, we're going to focus much of our time and effort on building sort of a system underneath the roster. And then 2 years from now or a year from now, when you can have all that in place, that's when you'll really start seeing Steve Cohen flex his financial muscles. And that'll especially be true if they lock up Lindor, which I think they probably will. Maybe Lindor and Conforto, who knows? And then you have this really nice core to build around where your main pieces are sort of locked up. The only one that would not have been would be Pete Alonso. And I think the Mets are going to rightly wait and see with Alonso, because as great as he was in 2019, was about as bad as he was in 2020. So I think everyone wants to just make sure that 2019 was the real Pete Alonso and not 2020. He's had a great spring. He's looked fantastic. But I think in many ways, the Mets are in a good position, and they should be trying to win because they currently have the best pitcher in Major League Baseball, and they're not going to always have that guy.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about that pitcher for a moment as we get ready to wrap up our time with you. You were on the beat when a very unheralded right-hander came up from the minor leagues, destined for the bullpen. At what point did you kind of figure out, and the other folks around you figure out there's something to this kid that, and why wasn't he on any radar?
Isn't it amazing how baseball's such a funny game? And like there's part of me that goes, okay, he would have emerged no matter what, DeGrom. But there's also a part of me that's like, what would have happened if Dylan G didn't like hurt his whatever that day that got DeGrom that start? Because if you all remember, DeGrom was not called up to start. He was called up to pitch out of the bullpen. Rafael Montero was the guy that was sort of looked at as this future starter. And then suddenly, and like, correct me if I'm wrong about the timing of this, but if I'm not mistaken, Dylan G got injured and Jacob DeGrom had to sort of make a spot start.
Yep.
And did great. And they're like, well, we're not going to not have you make another. Did great again. And the rest is history. I think a big part of it is his unusual background. I don't think that we could underestimate that. This is a guy that didn't start pitching till he was like 19 years old. He was a guy that was still sort of learning how to be a pitcher as he got into the pro ball. He was like very unpolished. But it's sort of to the Mets' benefit now, because compared to most 32-year-old pitchers at whatever age he is now, he has like 3/4 fewer bullets in his arm than most guys. I think that's a good sign for them.
It's amazing to think that at one point the quote unquote big three for the Mets were Matt Harvey, were Zach Wheeler, and was Rafael Montero. Those were the three that they were really counting on, with Jake DeGrom and Noah Syndergaard kind of being afterthoughts. And you look now where those three are. Granted, Wheeler's had some very good success in Philly, but Montero, nope. Harvey is struggling to make a Orioles team. And yet here you are with Jake DeGrom, 2-time Cy Young winner, and leading the staff of the Mets, and Noah Syndergaard hoping to come back middle of the summer and make a big impact for a team that could be in contention.
Yeah, it's amazing how it works out. I mean, look, you told me, if you think back to 2014, what year did Matt Harvey sort of have it do his thing? 13? I can't remember anymore, but whatever year Matt Harvey was Matt Harvey. If you said now here in 2021 that like Matt Harvey would be basically out of professional baseball essentially, then you would have believed it. It just wouldn't even have been possible. And that, Zach Wheeler, would be good, but had not really quite fully popped. He's been sort of inconsistent. You would have thought it was insane, of course, but that's how baseball works, right? I mean, this industry is littered with the corpses of guys that we thought were going to be great that weren't. I mean, as Mets fans, I mean, every team could point to guys like this, but as Mets, I mean, look, you think back to the Mets with like Generation K. I mean, how none of those guys really panned out. I guess Isringhausen kind of did as a relief pitcher sort of later, but that's how it works. And it's not a criticism of the team. It's not a criticism of the players. It's a weird game. It's a hard game. It's really hard to project. Most prospects don't ever pan out. Injuries play a big role in it. What's been fortunate about Jacob DeGrom is that he's for the most part stayed healthy. Noah Syndergaard is not. We have no idea what's going to happen when he comes back. I know his velocity has been good as he tries to come back, but look, the Mets put themselves in the position where they had like 4 or 5 really good pitching prospects. And whenever you're in that position, you hope 1 or 2 of them panned out. And it seems like 1 or 2 of them have.
So last thing from me, of course, the paperback's just out for Swing Kings. What is next for Jared Diamond?
What is next? Well, I have a lot going on in my personal life right now. Going to be away for much of the upcoming season. I don't know what day it is when people are hearing this. Is this running? Are people hearing this today?
Today or tomorrow, yeah.
Today or tomorrow. So, okay. So I'm breaking news for your podcast listeners. No, I have not said this publicly. I'm going to be on parental leave for much of the 2021 season. We're expecting identical twins in less than 2 weeks from when this released.
Congratulations, sir.
Yeah. So you're getting the big scoop on your podcast. Congratulations. So that's going to be taking up much of my time in 2021. But I'm planning on being back for later in the season and the postseason. So we'll see. In terms of big projects, like I'd love to write another book one day. it's not happening right now. I don't have an idea for one. I'm going to take a little bit of break. The other big thing happening with me is I'm going to be a professor next semester. I'm teaching a journalism
Oh, wow.
class at Manhattan College,
Very cool.
a sports writing class. So for 15 or 20 or so fortunate, unfortunate undergraduates will get to hear me talk for 3 hours a week, every week, all of next semester. So that's sort of the next big work thing on my radar.
Well, the book-
You know, coming from us, it's not just blowing smoke because you've always been friends of the show, my friend. But those 15 to 20 undergrads are extremely lucky because, in my opinion, you are the best in the business. And I can't wait to see you impart your wisdom upon the next batch.
Well, thank you. I love your hat, by the way. Great
I
hat.
wore it specifically for you in honor of Remy's Ride opening up this year. We are hoping to be there for opening day when Remy's Ride in the World Showcase in France does open.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's been way too long. I look forward to being able to go do stuff again. I have my first vaccine shot. I'm getting my second one on Monday. I think things are looking up. Yeah, things are looking up.
Yeah, once we kind of get back to a little bit of normal, we'll have to have you back for one of our famous Disney hot takes episodes.
Oh, I will be there. You know I will be.
Swing Kings is the book. We were so excited to have you here. We're so excited for you. Like EJ said, you've been a longtime friend to the show and a longtime friend to us. So we wish you nothing but the best, both professionally and personally. And we can't wait to have you back with us again.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Good luck, Jared. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, I tell you, EJ, you know, again, as we said it a couple times during the call, that you know, Jared Diamond is one of our all-time favorite Mets writers. Certainly was a joy to follow him on the beat, and I have told both privately and publicly that our good friend Justin Toscano is a great successor in many ways of Jared Diamond, and we had him join us last time on the show. And the thing I like about both of them, and I always have, is they write the articles that no one else does. They're in depth, they're well researched, and it's always a matter of, you were totally telling the story I didn't know I needed to hear today. You're telling me this story that is going to be epic, and I'm going to tell people about it for years, but I had no clue until I read it. And that's the quality that they both have. So I not only applaud Justin and Jared for what they've done professionally. I also applaud the future students that Jared will have teaching and professing this fall. That certainly I would love it if there's a future generation of sports writers in his mold.
No doubt about it. It's not just simple game recaps and injury list updates. It's actual stories, and that's what makes their writing so great. Is that it is nonfiction, but can often read as fiction because of the amazing detail that they both put into their stories.
Absolutely. So again, Swing Kings is the book. It is available everywhere now, and certainly, like I said earlier in the show, if you can hit up a small bookstore and get it there, great. If not, all the usual outlets apply. The key is to read the book. It is quite good, and I've recommended to a lot of people, and some of which actually have read the book, which is always nice when you recommend a book and they read it. But one of the rare times where one or two people have come back and actually said, "Hey, thanks for recommending that. I hadn't thought of that book, and it was really good, and I'm going to recommend it to a friend." So word of mouth works, and that is a book worthy of spreading the word that way. EJ, next time we talk, be a bit of an abbreviated edition of the Happy Recap, but it's one of the more fun episodes for you and me, where we sit down and we start to put a little bit of our Karnak game on for those of a certain age, and for those not of a certain age, it's when we predict stuff that'll never happen or will happen or doesn't happen. It's the prediction show. I'm looking forward to it. Always enjoy debating and discussing the merits of our various predictions, and usually you and I are pretty close, but there's always some fun differences.
Yep, it's also the show that I'm often referred to as a Mets shill. because of my optimism, but I just can't help myself. And I guarantee that next time will be absolutely no different, because as I'm putting some thoughts together as to where I think this team will end at the end of the season, I certainly could be accused of being a shill.
At the end of the day, though, if and this kind of my parting thought to an extent is, in the Steve Cohen era, what is a shill anymore? We have an owner that people actually like.
It's true, and we also still have a reporter on the beat and on the flagship who is still seemingly under the employ of the former owner. So there will definitely be some talk of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It will definitely we'll definitely continue to watch watch this. And yeah, it is kind of interesting to think that since S&Y was not included in the deal for the Mets, at least at this juncture, that the Mets will be broadcast all year long on a Wilpon owned media outlet. So while he's still on the board of directors, Fred Wilpon has very little power with the team, but by golly, he's got power with the network.
And that he does, and that he seemingly likes to flex his muscles about on a almost daily basis.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk more about that next time. Again, thanks to Jared Diamond. Swing Kings is the book. EJ, any final thoughts, my friend?
Let's go Mets. Let's televise some games, and let's get deep into some baseball here.
Actual baseball is about to actually happen. So we'll talk about that next week when we look at the season to come on the Happy Recap. Until then, let's go Mets.